Cyberpunk Edgerunners is one of the best anime ever made, period. Now I must confess my expectations for this anime were very low, for multiple reasons. For starters, I have not yet played Cyberpunk 2077. I think the reason is obvious, but in case it isn't, it's because the game shipped in a very buggy state. I actually do own Cyberpunk 2077, but the version I have is the PS4 version, which is apparently the worst version of the game. I'm aware that a lot of the issues with the game are now fixed, and believe me, after watching this anime, I'm going to jump into the game very soon. But one of my concerns was that I wasn't going to understand what was happening in the anime. I know that there are references to the game, and that a few select characters from the game show up in the anime, but I was a little worried that I wouldn't understand what was happening in the anime, or that the anime would spoil certain things that happen in the game. Additionally, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a video game adaptation. There is no phrase more cursed than video game adaptation. They all pretty much suck. If it gets a live-action adaptation, then you can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be an unpleasant watch. I know that with shows like Arcane, which I still haven't seen yet, and Castlevania, which is excellent, that video games can get good adaptations in the world of animation, but this is no guarantee of success. Finally, and this may surprise people, but I'm not really a fan of Studio Trigger. To clarify, they are a great studio and all of their anime have great animation. It's just that I'm generally not a fan of their anime. Kill la Kill was an anime that started awesome and then kind of just became weird for the sake of it. Gurren Lagann, which I know was animated by Gainax, but I think it's clear that the people who worked on that anime moved on to Trigger, was an anime that got better and better as it went on, but ultimately scuffed its landing with a nonsensical ending that was unnecessarily unhappy for certain characters. Darling in the Franxx is infamous for its poor ending, ruining an otherwise excellent anime. Keys Neither is really the only Studio Trigger anime that I actually like, and even then I think the anime should have been doubly as long. The point is, Studio Trigger is a fantastic studio, arguably one of the best around, but more often than not their anime just doesn't click with me. Hopefully you can see why I wasn't really excited about Cyberpunk Edgerunners, especially since Cyberpunk 2077 was the thing that told me to keep my hype in check. However, it turns out that I'm an idiot, because not only is Cyberpunk Edgerunners good, not only do I like it, not only do I love this anime, it is actually one of my favourite anime that I've ever watched. It turns out that my fear of not understanding what was happening in the anime was unfounded, as Cyberpunk Edgerunners is like Tales from the Borderlands, in the sense that having played the original game would likely enhance your experience, but it is not necessary for you to enjoy this anime. Cyberpunk Edgerunners has been so well received that it has even caused the original game to get a spike in player activity. The anime follows David Martinez, whose life is essentially just misery and suffering. He is very poor, but is smart enough to get accepted into a very good school. However, the students there are not very accepting of David due to his background. It's made very clear in this anime that the world of Cyberpunk is divided heavily by class. There are the haves and the have-nots, and David is definitely a have-not. The world of Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a very tragic one, and it's a future that you really don't want to come to pass. David is not an unusual case. There are so many people in his position who can't even afford to talk to a loved one whilst they are in the hospital. Then there are those that have so much money that even in death, paramedics will come to collect the body. It's these unfortunate circumstances, and a few others that I won't mention to avoid spoilers, that make David a character that is very easy to root for. When David finds a high-tech exoskeleton and has it grafted into his body, you can't help but cheer him on as he uses his newfound abilities to beat up the bullies at his school. It should come as no surprise that David eventually turns to a life of crime after meeting the enchanting Lucy, a character that he forms a deep connection with. They are each other's light in the darkness, and everything each of them do is done with the other in mind. Lucy is a character that initially comes across as cold and indifferent, not really caring about what happens to the people around her. However, as the layers of her character are peeled back, you realise that she is quite lonely and has dreams and aspirations of her own. Not only does she want to accomplish these dreams, she wants to accomplish them with the one that she loves at her side. It's this core character trait that makes her so perceptive to David's longing for purpose, and she constantly questions why he follows others' dreams instead of his own. It's a beautiful love story and a very believable one, and it is their relationship which will tug on your heartstrings more than anything else in this anime. Rebecca is arguably the most infamous character to come out of this anime, with people arguing online over whether the character is a lolly or not. Anyone who watches anime already knows the answer as to whether she is or not, but that's not really important. Rebecca is a surprisingly great character. She's feisty and commanding, and she's the sort of character you can't take your eyes off when they appear on screen. It's clear that she cares for her crew, especially David, and once the anime is over, you'll definitely miss this little ball of energy. Main is the de facto leader of David's group, and he's a very charismatic, likeable leader, which makes his downfall quite upsetting. He was always headstrong and dependable, and it was hard watching his cybernetic stance get the best of him. He had a hugely positive effect on David, but unfortunately a negative one too. It's Main's dream that ends up becoming David's, and whilst it's evident that Main helped David become the man he ended up being, he also was somewhat responsible for leading David astray. Faraday was also a very interesting villain. Firstly, because he was voiced by Gus Fring. That's right, Giancarlo Esposito is now an official anime dub voice actor. And of course, he's a villain. Whoever Giancarlo's agent is deserves a raise because Giancarlo keeps showing up in banger after banger show. He's in 4 of the most prolific television shows ever made: Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, The Boys and The Mandalorian. Then he shows up as the main antagonist in Far Cry 6, one of the most famous Western video game franchises that's still going, and now he's in Cyberpunk Edgerunners, one of the best anime ever made. Now Faraday may be a villain, but he doesn't feel like any of Giancarlo Esposito's other roles. Gus Fring was a calculated man who always felt like he was on the top, even though he wasn't. It was his intelligence and determination that were his greatest strengths, and his willingness to do anything necessary to achieve his goals that made him a fantastic villain. Stan Edgar is a softer villain. He doesn't really come across as evil, at least to me. He's just someone who's trying to please the shareholders and keep the company from descending into chaos due to the actions of a man-child who has far more power than he ever deserved. Of course he's corrupt, but he's not trying to take over the world or anything. Moff Gideon is just pure evil. You can see that he takes great pleasure in killing, even his own men when they disappoint him. He doesn't stand for weakness, and you can see the glee on his face as he metaphorically twists the knife into his enemies. Compared to these villains, Faraday comes across as pathetic. The man wants to climb the corporate ladder like everyone else in Cyberpunk and will do anything and take advantage of anyone to do that. If Giancarlo's other roles could be compared to lions, then Faraday is much more of a weasel trying to make a name for himself, no matter who he comes across. One of the best aspects of Cyberpunk Edgerunners is the violence, gore and sex. When Netflix released the Not Safe for Work trailer, I was shocked. I didn't know anime was allowed to go that far without becoming a hentai. I loved how graphic the violence was in this show. It really lent into how awful living in this world would be. It helps that Trigger, like with the story, pulled no punches and went as detailed with the violence in this show as they could. People get their heads blown off, leaving their faces hanging off the side of, well, where their face should be. Characters get diced up into little pieces and obliterated into viscera. This is one of the most violent, graphic anime that I've ever watched, and I loved every second of it. I will admit that sometimes characters are naked for no reason in this show. Sometimes the nudity is justified based on what a character is doing, but other times I just wanted a character to put a shirt on. Look, I love boobs as much as the next guy, but sometimes I want to actually listen to what the characters are saying instead of staring at one of them. Honestly, the amount of times I had to keep rewinding certain scenes because each time I watched it, I kept getting distracted. Too many. Also, I think the few sex scenes in this anime were justified. Why? Because the scenes weren't hot. If anything, they were kind of disgusting. They really fit the tone of the show and made you uncomfortable, mainly because they weren't really sex scenes, just a guy and a piece of machinery. I've spoken a lot in previous videos about how important endings are to me. Fortunately, Cyberpunk Edgerunners has a magnificent ending. It's an ending like Better Call Saul's, where if I think about it too long, I just end up feeling sad. It perfectly encapsulates the show. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a tragedy, and received the tragic ending that it deserved. David thought he was special, and believed he would achieve the dreams of others, but he was wrong. He wasn't special, just a guy with a higher tolerance for cybernetics, and in the end, he was just another victim of Night City. Thanks for watching.